Welcome Ficus friends. In this Bonsaify video we are going to look at which one of these three ficus species is best for beginners. First, let's just name them. This is a willow leaf ficus or Ficus salicaria. There's also a older name, Ficus Nerifolia, that is used in some places. It's the first ficus species that I use for bonsai, and probably still my favorite. We'll come back to that. This is a Ficus Benjamina, most likely the too little variety, and it has a small kind of curly leaf on it. Ficus Benjamina is one of the standard ficuses that is used as houseplants. You might see a similar leaf and branch pattern in ones that have a braided trunk or other similar mass market houseplants. And the third one is Golden Gate ficus or tiger bark ficus. This is Ficus Microcarpa, and if you think that the leaves are big, even though it's called Microcarpa, you should see the one that's called Macrocarpa. Now, bonsai beginners end up dealing with a lot of challenges that maybe once you get over the horticulture hump, you don't have to deal with later. But let's talk a little bit about the different characteristics of these three types of ficus. Now, don't get me wrong, all ficuses, ficusi, ficusotomuses, let's just call them figs, all of them are good for beginners in one way or another. These are all tropical plants, which means that you can grow them indoors during cold temperatures and outdoors during warm temperatures. Basically, they don't want to get below about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, with willow leaf ficus, the characteristics of the plant are kind of interesting. If you like a plant that has a very squat stature with a very large nabari, then this is a good plant to work with because they naturally make really large roots, and you can create a really dramatic large root display on them in pretty short order. What you can't do is get the trunk above the nabari to be quite as big as it might be on a regular tree. So they sort of turn into a cartoonish version of a ficus in some ways, with almost like a pancake flat nabari around them. The other features that make willow leaf ficus really great are that it has a very small leaf for a ficus, and they actually reduce reasonably well when you start trimming the tree back. They backbud like almost all ficus do, and they are generally adaptable to most bonsai practices, meaning you can repot them without too much trouble. As long as you keep them warm and watered and fertilized, they are going to be a good beginner plant. Moving on to the Ficus Benjamina, whether it's the too little variety or this one, I find them to be just slightly less cooperative than the other two ones that I have here. You can see that there's a little bit of twig dieback on this one, even though I've been keeping it in a greenhouse. They seem to be somewhat sensitive to becoming pot-bound and have a little bit more of a decline in health as a result, so they need to be repotted on a regular basis. And because the leaves are nice and small, they make nice fine branching. They don't seem to bulk up in the trunk quite the way that the other two do, but they also don't make giant, what some people call potato roots on the willow leaf ficus and other ficus varieties that I don't have here on the table with me. One of the biggest benefits of these guys is I believe that they're a little bit better for low light conditions. So if you're growing indoors and you don't have a lot of supplemental light, then as a beginner, you might find these easier to grow just because of your light conditions. Finally, the Golden Gate ficus or tiger bark ficus, also what I call mass market ficus, is probably the most common ficus that is grown as bonsai. It is the standard Malzai S-curve bonsai that you would find on many bonsai websites or mass market retailer websites selling bonsai. It's probably the best tree for beginners. I'm not going to lie, they got the species selection right, in my opinion. It's very vigorous. The leaves are pretty adaptable. It's not particularly prone to insect infestations, And the trunk and nabari characteristics are reasonably what you would expect from a tree species. Now, as a beginner, you might not understand what I mean about that, but let's just say that the proportions that the plant is going to give you will naturally kind of conform to what you would expect from a tree. Whereas these guys are going to have much bigger roots than you might expect for the size of the tree, and this guy's closer to normal as well. Now, if you haven't already seen it, we have a whole series on adapting a mass market ficus to create a really nice bonsai, but you can start anywhere that you want as a beginner and have a lot of success with this tree. Now, just to reiterate, the conditions under which ficus tend to really thrive are warm and humid, hot conditions. Because they're a tropical plant, they're not used to having any sort of cold. And that means that if you live in an area where you get cold winter weather, you're going to need to protect these. Now, if you plan on growing them indoors all the time, make sure that you have good air circulation as well as good light. And by good light, I mean a lot of light, probably a lot more than you actually want to be looking at. The more light, the better. And keep in mind that the amount of light that a lighting source, such as the one that's lighting this video, creates is inversely proportional to the distance. So this plant is getting less light from that photo light than this plant is. And so when you're growing things, all of your plants would be headed that direction, and this one would be getting the most light. Apart from light, water and air are the other two main ingredients. Fertilizer really is just like taking a multivitamin. You can't do without it, but it's not the biggest factor in terms of plant growth. So make sure that your plants get a lot of light, get as much water as they need, and then consider putting, if you're keeping them indoors, an oscillating fan on them or something to that effect so that air movement is optimized across the leaf surfaces as they're growing. It'll really improve their health. That wraps up this beginner's video on bonsai ficus selection. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.